President Cyril Ramaphosa has just wrapped up his reply to the debate on the State of the Nation address at a joint sitting of the two houses of Parliament. We're now joined by Newzroom Afrika's politics reporter, Qaanitah Hunter. Qaanitah, very good afternoon to you. Thank you very much for your time. Let's take off from, I guess, from where we left off. I mean, yesterday, well, and the day before, for the past 2 days, all these parties were others criticizing him, others measured in their criticism. Obviously, members of his own party and some within the Government of National Unity supporting him very much. I just thought overall it was a very measured speech.
Absolutely. The president not delving quite deep into the criticism, but rather responding in broad strokes. Bravo, this was a little bit of a different debate in the State of the Nation address, given this new reality that South Africa is being governed by this coalition government called the Government of National Unity. And the president obviously had to factor that in, because that characterized the debate where you had parties that were in opposition before who are now in government defending him, but at times also being highly critical of some of the initiatives that he announced in his address last week.
It was interesting that even where you felt he was about to go for, let's say, the DA, for example, on the expropriation bill, he sort of dialed back a little. He was very measured in how, even in his criticism of how he implied they were taking credit for things that were already set in motion. In other words, things that they didn't themselves initiate at the time of joining the GNU, but saying, it's okay if you want to take the credit, but, you know, the credit is actually not yours. But even then, in other words, where he felt the need to actually set the record straight, if I was to put it like that, he was still very measured.
The kids call it subtweeting, and I think that's what the president did in relation to the DA, because a lot of their contribution to the debate was claiming,
this is what
brownie
the DA
points.
is doing
Absolutely.
in the GNU.
And they used the debate to frame this narrative that the DA is holding this GNU together, and the president was trying really hard to create an alternative narrative. But I think it was interesting how he started, which is focusing on the elephant in the room, and that is the geopolitical scenario that South Africa faces at the moment, saying to AfriForum without mentioning them, and saying to Solidarity again without mentioning them, that, you know, these are people who take the grievances that they have, you know, internally in South Africa, externally, and warned against that. The president didn't respond to demands by opposition MPs to explain how he's actually going to deal with that. And I think the biggest criticism of the president's response is that he did not come back with detailed plans on anything. What he sought to do was just justify where he stood on some of the things he spoke about in his address.
Is it not because perhaps he reckons that by doing or saying whatever he can say, including not saying certain things, that was his way of rallying everyone behind one common position, to say we're under attack, or to use a word he used during his State of the Nation address, we're not going to be bullied. You know? So instead of saying things that may just divide or allow people to then take different parts, it was important for him to make sure that he rallies everyone behind him. And then only later can we then perhaps talk about what to do next, how to deal with a Trump and so on.
I mean, one can weigh in on that and say that, yes, of course, the president, you know, even taking that sentiment of we are not going to be bullied further by saying we're not going to be bullied by those in our country and outside our country, obviously making those references to the lobby groups that have been making demands around South Africa's position around expropriation, for example. But the reality of it is that the purpose of debate is for the president to have an action plan. And the criticism from MPs is the how. And the president needed to use this occasion to respond to actual criticism instead of coming back with these broad strokes. I found it really interesting when he took a lot of time in discussing his ascension to the Bella Act now, the NHI, and the Expropriation Act, saying the president doesn't just make up laws. It's Parliament. There's a
role
framework.
Parliament has
Absolutely,
to play.
and that he has to assent to these bills unless he has really great substantial reasons that are premised in the Constitution to then refer it back to Parliament. And he did not have it in these particular cases because those three now acts were subject to the discussion with opposition MPs and members of the GNU pulling left and right on those matters.
This is the last point. I found him, I just felt he fell short right at the end when he was now talking about our soldiers who are back from the DRC, the ceremony that he'll be leading later on. That because most of the criticism I mean, of course there are people who even criticize, saying, what are we even doing there, and all of that. But for most people, it was about sending an ill-equipped, underprepared, a force to deal with what they have had to deal with. And he didn't venture into that. In other words, from acknowledging the fact that the SANDF is under-resourced, what are we going to do, the wisdom of sending a less capable force, whether it's in terms of resources or the situation that they will have to confront on the ground. He didn't venture into that, but instead emphasized, in my view, even overemphasized the fact that we have a role to play in maintaining peace on the continent, silencing the guns, and so on, but not venturing into, which to me was the major part of the criticism, which was that that army was not prepared for the role that it has to play in that part of the world.
Yeah, the president sticking to broad strokes also on this matter, saying they welcome the debate, but not delving into that substance that you say, that this is not about the ideological discussion whether South Africa needs to be involved in peacekeeping or not. A safer African continent undoubtedly is better for South Africa. But the question is the how, again. And now when you have the remains of 14 soldiers that are descending on South African soil today after, the last 3 weeks of turmoil, it was interesting to say that the president only referring to the summit that took place in Tanzania last weekend, the East African Community and the SADC summit, where South Africa pushed really, really hard, he said, to include non-state actors. And so that was a big diplomatic win for South Africa. And so there's this duality that exists that says South Africa is playing an important role in a very deadly conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but at the same time, it's failing to address a very substantial reality, which is its soldiers and its army in general is underprepared and facing huge consequences of that.
Qaanitah Hunter, thanks very much for your time. Qaanitah, of course, watching the president's reply after 2 days of debating his State of the Nation address. No doubt over the next few hours we will be talking about this story still.